gonna be. Better know, and a better plan. Better plan all day. Better plan all week. Better plan all month. Better plan all year.
Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Weird New Mexico. And here I am, Leslie Lobato, and I'm bringing you a Halloween episode. Today's October 31st, 2022. Going to get right to it and tell you that New Mexico is full of legends, myths, and stories, and they're pretty spooky. Hence the whole reason why I'm even bringing this show out is to tell these interesting stories. But many are haunted, so and scary, and Halloween is just perfect to tell you some of these stories. So first, I'm going to tell you the story about La Llorona, and this is a story that all kids are told throughout New Mexico when they're young kids. This legend of La Llorona is Spanish for the weeping woman, and she's been a big part of the American Southwest since the time of the conquistadors. The tall, thin spirit of a woman is a beauty, blessed with long black hair, and she wears a white gown. She will always be wearing this white gown, and she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing and into the night, searching for her children. 2 boys that she had, but she wails through the night searching for any child that she will drag to screaming to a watery grave. So no one really knows for sure when the legend of La Llorona really began and started, but the common thread of the story is that she's a spirit of a doomed mother who mourns the loss of her children, and she searches for eternity for them in all rivers and lakes. And so she was born with the name Maria, and to a peasant family in a hub of the village. And she was such a startling beauty that she captured the attention of all men, rich, poor, all of the area. And she was said to have spent her days in humble peasant surroundings, but she would always don her white gown in the evenings and thrill the men who admired her at all the neighboring fandangos, or also known as fiestas or dance parties. But the young men would always eagerly await anxiously for her arrival, and she reveled in this attention. She loved the attention she was getting from the men all around that would come to these parties. But, however, she did have the 2 young, small sons, and it was difficult for her to go out and spend time with suitors while having these 2 small boys. She couldn't cavort with the gentlemen all around. So, one day, the 2 small boys were found drowned in the river. Some say they drowned through her neglect, and others say that they drowned by her own hand. And another legend says that La Llorona was a caring woman full of life and married a wealthy man who lavished her with gifts and attention. But however, after she had borne him the 2 sons, he went back to his womanizing and alcoholic ways that he had before, and he would even leave her for months at a time, and when he would visit, it was only to see the children. And he no longer cared for her, and would tell her that he was going to marry a woman from his own wealthy class. So that sucks. It happened back then. I'm assuming, the conquistador times, this has got to be 16th century time that this story originated. But she started to feel resentment for her 2 boys because he would only pay attention to him and not her at all. Like one day she was strolling with their 2 children on a shadowy pathway near the river when her husband came by in a carriage with an elegant lady sitting next to him. And he stopped and spoke to the children, but ignored Maria entirely and then drove away the carriage down the road. So upon seeing this, Maria had flown into a great rage, and she turned against her children, and she seized them and threw them in the river nearby. And as they disappeared downstream, she had realized what she had done and ran down the bank to save them. But it was too late. Maria broke down into inconsolable grief and running down the street screaming and wailing in despair. But the beautiful Llorona, she mourned them day and night, and during this time she would not eat at all, and she would walk along the river in her long white gown and just searching for her boys, hoping they would come back to her. She cried endlessly as she roamed the riverbanks, and her gown became soiled and worn. When she refused to eat, she became very thin, making her appearance appear taller and look like a walking skeleton. But still, as a young woman, she ended up dying on the banks of the river. Not long after her death, her restless spirit began roaming the banks of the Santa Fe River when darkness would fall. And so her weeping and wailing became a curse of the night, and people began to be afraid to go out after dark. And this is what they would tell us kids. I didn't grow up with my Hispanic side, but I had many childhood friends that they told me the story of La Llorona and the elders in their family as well. But she was said to have been drifting between the trees along the shoreline, out or floating in the current, with her dress float out along the waters. And many a dark night, people would see her walking along the riverbank and crying for her children. And so they no longer spoke of Maria in the village, but they would rather call her La Llorona, the weeping woman. And children, like I said, were warned not to ever go after dark, or La Llorona might snatch them and throw them to their deaths in the flowing waters of the river. Whew, boy, that's some scary shit, right? And so she's been seen along many rivers across the Southwest, specifically New Mexico. She's become a big part of Hispanic culture everywhere. And part of this legend is that those who do not treat their families well will see her, and she will teach them a lesson. Yeah, that's your typical story you tell your kids so that they come home before it gets dark. It was scary in those days, just like it's scary now. There was just fewer people, but kids would disappear then just as they do now. But I don't want to talk about that. Next, I'll be talking about Taos. Taos is in about central northern New Mexico, not too far from Santa Fe, Las Vegas, pretty close to where Los Alamos National Labs is located. And in this area, the residents hear a hum, and it's called the Taos hum. And so there's a variety of theories that have been offered as an explanation as to what this hum is, explaining or ranging from the mundane to the fantastic, psychological to the paranormal, stoned hippies, secret government mind control experiments, and underground UFO bases. And everything in between has been blamed for this phenomenon. And so the hum seems to have first been reported in the early 1990s. Joe Mullins, a professor emeritus of engineering at the University of New Mexico, had conducted research into this Taos hum. And based on a survey of residents, about 2%, just 2% of the general population believed to be hearers, those who claim to detect the hum. And so sensitive equipment was set up in the homes of several of the hearers, measuring sounds and vibrations, but after extensive testing, nothing unusual was detected. And apparently they've been doing this for a long time. And there's theories. The research revealed, however, that there was not a single identifiable Taos hum, but there were several different ones. And that's why it was difficult to pinpoint on what exactly it was coming from, because some would describe it as a whir, hum, or a buzz. And the fact that not everyone is hearing the same exact noise suggests that they may have been reporting subjective experiences instead of objective sounds. like the running of a diesel truck or the boom of a subwoofer. Those can be pretty loud. So, moving on, with being skeptical of the sound source, an outspoken group of believers in the hum had reached out to the New Mexico congressional delegation. In 1993, a group of experts were assembled for the University of New Mexico, Los Alamos National Labs, which was nearby, and the Phillips Air Force Space Laboratory, along with Sandia National Laboratories, to look into the existence of this alleged hum. Yeah, it took a joint effort to try to locate what this possibly could be. But even with the high-tech equipment that they did have, the team had set out to collect the noise data from different sites around the Taos and interview the hearers of the noise. But nothing really conclusive had turned up at all, and their final conclusion in the study had come with the words, "We are left with a mystery." So, there's another haunted place, I guess you could say. But of course, it's always a mystery where legends, ghosts, and other unexplained circumstances can thrive. But after looking around a little bit, there are scientists that have said that it's actually the sounds of a factory when it's closed releasing pressure. I can't remember what the factory was because it didn't fall with the whole mystery of this thing. So anyway, next I'll talk of Uruca Mesa. Now, there's not a whole lot of information I could find about this one, but Uruca Mesa lies on what is known as the Philmont Boy Scout Ranch. This ranch is very frequented, especially among the Boy Scouts of America. It's a place where, they held the jamborees and the larger get-togethers. I was in Girl Scouts, so I kind of know how. We used to have those too. In fact, there's one by our nearby lake. But anyway, there's lots of strange, weird happenings going on over there. Very the light balls, orbs, colored orbs that people typically see in forests and wilderness. Creatures, shadows of creatures have been seen moving throughout the trees. There's really not a whole lot to find on Uruca Mesa, but not a whole lot showed up. But the Native American tribes in the area had thought that, or believed that this place was actually the entrance to the demon world. I don't know, a demon world or the demon world. From an aerial perspective, the mesa looks like a skull, but I didn't think so, so that's why I didn't even pull it up. It looked more like a banana to me. I don't know where they're getting skull from that particular picture, unless there was a different picture that I didn't see. But taking it all into account, Uruca Mesa is billed as one of the creepiest places on Earth. So, with that said, when I come back after this break, I'm going to talk about the New Mexico State Penitentiary. That place is very haunted, and there's good reason for it to be that way. There was a riot that happened February 2nd and the 3rd in 1980, and it was a gruesome situation. It was really bad, and so it really... Wow, there's a lot to tell about that story, and I'm going to make it as brief as possible. And then many other numerous haunted places, such as the Doña Ana County Courthouse and Jail, and the Luna Mansion, and a couple others. And coming up later on, I'll talk about the Chupacabra and Skinwalkers. That one is going to be... a scary subject to talk about. But anyway, we'll be back. See you real soon.
Suddenly, to my surprise, in the monstrous
Hello, and we're back. Thank you for joining me for my Halloween episode, October 31st, 2022. I'm going to jump right into the next segment here, and this is about the New Mexico State Penitentiary. Now, why is this place haunted? I'm going to tell you, and it's pretty bad. It's one of the most intense events in New Mexico history. It's more commonly referred to here to the native New Mexicans as the Santa Fe prison riot. And so, as the story goes, in 1980, in cell block 4, in the far northern end from the control center, was the scene of one of the most violent prison riots in the correctional history of the United States. Over 2 days, 33 inmates were killed and 12 officers were held hostage by prisoners who had escaped from crowded dormitories located at the southern end from the control center. Men were brutally butchered, dismembered, and decapitated and hung up on the cells and burned alive. This section of the prison was closed in 1998 and is now referred to as the Old Main. Now there are stories of that I've seen videos like on the History Channel type, and they'll if you watch one of those, you'll see a more vivid picture of that event. There's a book there's actually a couple books. I can't remember the book. I didn't even write down the book that was mentioned here, but this isn't research out of that book, though. But the book that I'm aware of is called The Devil's Butcher Shop, and that was a book that my mom read, and this was back in the 90s when I was in high school, and she would tell me sections or parts of the story, and it was pretty intense. This is why it's haunted. It's reputedly haunted with numerous unexplained phenomena, from prison doors opening and closing on their own accord to ghostly voices and footsteps. The New Mexico Penitentiary riot, or the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot, which took place on February 2nd and 3rd, 1980, as the Penitentiary of New Mexico, located outside of Santa Fe. This was the most violent prison riot in U.S. history, where inmates had taken total control of the prison, and 12 officers were taken hostage. Several inmates were killed by other prisoners, and with some being tortured and mutilated because they had previously been informants to the authorities. And the police regained control of the penitentiary in 36 hours after the riots had begun. And by then, 33 inmates had died, and more than 200 were treated for injuries. And none of the 12 officers that were taken hostage were killed, but seven suffered serious injuries caused by beatings and the unthinkable treatment of assault. And so the cause of the riot is well documented. It had the same problems that any correctional facility would have that would upset the inmates where they're housed. And so author Roger Morris, he had wrote that the riot was a predictable incident based on the assessment of prison conditions. The prison overcrowding, which even to this day is a major problem, and we all know about all that. It's all over, and so it's due to prison overcrowding and inferior services. And so these were the major problems of disturbance. So on the night of the riot, there were 1,156 inmates in a prison that had beds for fewer than 963. And so first-time non-violent prisoners were not adequately separated from repeat violent offenders or prisoners. And so many were housed in crowded, unsanitary dormitories. The food was of poor quality, and a problem which was exacerbated by cockroaches and mice. Intestinal diseases were common, and a visiting warden reported the penitentiary of New Mexico as the filthiest institution he has ever seen. Pretty bad stuff. So you can imagine, of course, it would upset these people, especially since the cancellation of educational, recreational, and other rehabilitative programs were canceled. So the inmates ended up spending lockdown for long periods, and this started in 1975. 5 years before this riot. So they went through 5 years of these conditions that created strong feelings of deprivation and discontent in the population, and it would increasingly lead to violence and disorder. Even the Attica prison riot was organized as solidarity among the prisoners, demonstrated by their lack of interest in attacking one another. There was the snitch system at the New Mexico State Penitentiary, where prisoners were given special treatment if they would be snitches, obviously. This reminds me of the show Prison Break that ran like almost 20 years ago on TV. I remember seeing similar behavior in that show that is in this story. But this pitted inmate against inmate, resulting in distrust among the inmates unless they were identified with a group. And so the events had spiraled out of control within the cell blocks in large part of two groups. The Chicanos were the first, and they targeted retribution for specific grudges. And the other gang was loosely labeled the Aryan Brotherhood and was led by some of the most dangerous inmates, who by this time had been released from the segregation in cell block 3. So they're out of there now, and they're in the population too. So you got these two very angry groups running around the population in cell block 4. Or no, they're in cell block 3, but they was segregation. Because there's a basement where solitary is, and that's mentioned as well. But they decided to break into cell block 4, which held the prisoners labeled as the informers. This is where the reasoning that so many people died. And so cell block 4 also housed inmates who were mentally ill, convicted of sex crimes, or otherwise vulnerable, and held a total of 96 prisoners in this segment. So initially, after taking over control of the control center, the call was immediately to take revenge on the snitches at the far north of the prison. However, to get there, they had to pass the psychology wing, and multiple prisoners broke in to find drugs. And of course, these drugs are in bulk, so they're taking them, ingesting them, they're taking them, they're going to sell them, and they set fire to the psychology office in order to destroy the psychology records that had been used to keep prisoners from obtaining parole. Of course, right? I mean, how many of them were actually, well, if they're murderers, I don't think they'd have a chance of parole anyway. But the first to arrive in cell block 4 found that they did not have the keys to enter the cell block. So the rioters had found blowtorches nearby in cell block 5, and they'd been brought in because there was construction going on there. And I guess the workers didn't put their shit away. So they used these blowtorches to cut open the security grills into cell block 4 over the next 5 hours. It was going to take hours to cut through the cell block, so several inmates had left to raid the records office. So they raided the records office so they can look for files that would identify who the informants really were. And so before sunrise on Friday, there were rioters with walkie-talkies that began detailing their plans to harm those in cell block 4 to the prison officials over the radio, but no action was taken. One official stated, "It's their ass," when overheard speaking about the men in their segregation facility. Man. I don't know, there's a recent story that kind of went that way. But, locked in their cells, the segregated prisoners called to the state police just outside the fence, pleading for them to save them. Waiting officers did nothing, despite there being a back door to cell block 4, which would have offered a way to free them. But as the door was intended only for emergency use, and therefore was never opened, the keys were not readily available. And so the state police agreed with the prison negotiators not to enter the prison as long as the officers being held hostage were kept alive. So as dawn broke, an execution squad finally cut through the grill and entered the rows of cells. And the security panel controlling the cell doors just inside the grill was burned, so meaning each cell had to be opened with blowtorches one at a time. When opened, the victims were pulled from their cells to be tortured, dismembered, hanged, or burned alive. By 10 a.m., 12 of the 96 prisoners in cell block 4 had been identified as snitches and brutally murdered. In total, 16 inmates would be killed in cell block 4, with most of the violence committed by noon that day. Wow. And there's a book on this, like I was saying. It's called The Devil's Butcher Shop. It's a pretty thick book, probably about 300 pages. It's a big story. So, and even the BBC covered it on Time Watch, the Time Watch program. There was an eyewitness that had described the carnage in cell block 4. They had seen an inmate held up in a window, and he was being tortured by another inmate using a blowtorch, burning his face and eyes until his head blew up. It just exploded. And this is where I have to interject a story. See, I have a familiarity to this event because my mom, before she met my dad, dated a guy. And he died there in that riot. I mean, she obviously wasn't seeing him anymore, before I came into the picture. But in 1980, I was probably a toddler and whatnot. And she told me that he died. Somebody took a metal, like a metal shank of some sort, a long metal rod, and shoved it in one ear, and it right through out the other. And there are stories on the internet that specifically tell of that particular form of torture to death, I guess you could say. So it's pretty disturbing. So as I was saying, men were killed with piping and work tools and crude homemade shanks, knives. One man was partially decapitated because he was hung and thrown over the second tier balcony and with the noose around his neck. The corpse was then dragged down and hacked up later on. Fire had been set in the gymnasium to burn a pile of corpses, but it had gotten out of control and the fire spread. The fire burned through the roof, and the fire had been set in the psychology wing as well. And also, fire was also set to the Protestant chapel. They had a major dislike. Many inmates had a major dislike for the chaplain. The Protestant chaplain was nicknamed Axe Handle for his participation in the Night of the Axe Handles 4 years later, where they took many inmates and made them run like down a hallway lined with many guards and officers and numerous staff of the prison with axe handles, and beat them as they ran down this corridor. It was too long of a story to really include, so that was just a brief rundown of that. But the Catholic chapel next door went untouched. Situated across the hall from the main control center, the prison library was also only experienced smoke. It didn't burn. And a third fire had been set in the records office, burning all records that could have been used as evidence related to the prisoner's civil rights claims in the Duran consent decree. So in the end, after it was all taken under control, only a few inmates were prosecuted for crimes committed during this uprising. But according to author Roger Morris, most crimes went unpunished. The longest additional sentence that was given to any of the inmates was a conviction of 9 years. And nationally known criminal lawyer William L. Summers was the lead defense team in defending dozens of inmates charged in the aftermath. In 1982, Summers had received the criminal defense lawyer Robert C. Haney Award for his work in defending the inmates prosecuted in regard to the riot. Much evidence was lost and destroyed during and after this riot. Yeah, so there was ample evidence. There was ample evidence from over 10 grand jury investigations between 1977 and 1979 about the conditions of this penitentiary, but the PNM administration had resisted to any changes, and the legislature refused to allocate any kind of funding, the necessary funding to make these changes. So the last time the U.S. District Court grand jury ordered improvements was in November 1979, 2 months before the riot. So, it was a really bad situation that happened there. It was overcrowded. They were neglected. The food was shitty. I mean, there's a lot more to it. I remember my mom telling me a story out of that book, and he was referred to as the dog boy. He was very young. He was probably 18 or 19, and I can't recall exactly why he was in there, but I'm sure it was a very non-violent offense, like probably possessing a gram of marijuana or something. This is 1980. He was carried away. I think he was one in the psychology area in cell block 4 that was decapitated because it was a mistaken identity. And as he was taken away in an ambulance, nearby dogs, coyotes and wolves howled as he was being driven away. And there was rumor that he was a dog boy. Like, he was able to shapeshift and stuff. He loved dogs. But anyway, that's it for the New Mexico State Penitentiary, and I gotta move on. This one's taking too long. So, with the other haunted places that we have in New Mexico were in the slideshows that I just showed, and that is the Luna Mansion. And so a visit to the Valencia County just isn't complete without a tour of this mansion. It was built in the 1880s, and it's a unique building, being the only known Victorian-style structure made out of the traditional adobe known to our area. And it was built as a gift from the Santa Fe Railway in exchange for access to the extensive land holdings of the Luna and Otero families. They're very prominent families. They've been in New Mexico for a very long time, since the days of the conquistadors. And so visitors today who often come to experience the site's rich history and delicious restaurant, it's converted now, are surprised to the sight of a ghost. And the ghost is supposedly that of Josefita Otero, who died during the renovations to the mansion in 1951. And since she left so much unfinished business, she's said to still be hanging around. Her spirit is often seen sitting in her rocking chair or walking up and down the mansion's expansive staircase. Yeah, so there's a photo of the outside of the mansion. And then the Amador Hotel, there's a photo of the inside of this hotel with a grand lobby that is very large, and it was built in 1886. And the Amador Hotel is popular on the Las Cruces ghost tour stop. And so during the tours, guests have reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in the hallways and flashlights turning off and on with no reason, mysteriously, and people having their arms scratched. And some say it's the work of a ghost of a little girl named Annie who frequents the rooms on the second floor. There wasn't much information left about her either. And one that I think is pretty interesting is the Doña Ana County Courthouse and Jail. This was featured on Ghost Adventures, and it was built in 1937. This courthouse is no longer in use, but it remains an attraction due to its reputation as a hotbed for paranormal happenings. It's the location of many deaths over the years. It's been unused since 2008. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators have made a point to always stop in and some say they've encountered an unknown violent entity in addition to shadowy apparitions that have been seen by tourists and other people. And people also have reported feeling the cold spots in the building, a surefire sign of ghost activity according to many believers. And the other creepy occurrences are a repeat visitor to the site states that he's been scratched by an invisible hand and has witnessed a jail cell door closing on its own. What I find fascinating about this is a totally other area, and this also results in a scratch on the arm, but it's probably not Annie. I don't know. I never really heard of scratches being very common. I mean, not usually. There's other things, of course, like having a lamp thrown at your face. That sucks. But anyway, so we're going to take another break. Next, we're going to talk about the Chupacabra and the Skinwalkers, and that's going to be the really scary one. Hope you're ready for it. And hello, we're back for segment 3 of episode 3 of the Halloween episode. And next, another popular creature that we, I don't want to say celebrate, I wanted to say, but a common cryptid that we have here is Chupacabra. The Chupacabra is very common story that we have here, but not just here. The legends of the blood-sucking creatures have been present in many cultures throughout history, and this is a vampire-like creature that has been gaining a considerable amount of notoriety. It's notorious. So, but it's commonly known as a bloodsucker, goatsucker. I mean, goatsucker is Spanish for chupacabra. Oh, wait, no. Chupacabra is Spanish for goat sucker. Getting that backwards. So this creature has been a constant conundrum to cryptozoologists in North and South America for more than 50 years, with sightings in various regions of Puerto Rico, Brazil, Chile, Mexico, and the United States. This is one very well-traveled beast, and it's been an anomaly since the early 1950s. The Chupacabra was at its height of notoriety in the 1990s, even surpassing such longtime favorites such as the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot. And so incidents have been reported in Arizona, Oregon, Michigan, Illinois, New Jersey, New Mexico, Florida, parts of Chile, Brazil, and Mexico. But the majority of activity has occurred in Puerto Rico. A rash of attacks plagued various regions of Puerto Rico in 1995. In Canovanas alone, several hundred livestock fatalities were attributed to El Chupacabra. Reported incidents of these sorts of creatures vary somewhat, but there are still the several basic characteristics that pop up over and over again. And in most cases, witnesses will describe the creature as being 4.5 to 5.5 feet tall, with an oval-shaped head bearing alien-like eyes that glow red. Most descriptions claim that the creature has long, feathery spines that run down the back of its head, down its spine to the rump. Many eyewitnesses claim or report a strong, unpleasant sulfur-type odor, but others say that the creature has no smell. Sulfur is the smell of Yellowstone. It has a very... I kind of like the smell of sulfur, because it's just... I don't know, I feel like it gives me a long memory ago of a bygone time of prehistory. Maybe, I don't know, but some say that the skin is similar to a frog's, where it's green in color with mottled specks, and others claim that it has the appearance of a furry lizard with scaly skin. Maybe it's part fur. I mean, furry with scaly skin. But although the bipedal creature generally ambles on 2 legs, it has been known to run on all 4. Many assert a kangaroo-like qualities, saying that the Chupacabra uses its strong hind legs to jump rather than walk. Others suggest that a more ape-like quality is in the creature's gait. And so the origin of the Chupacabra is a subject of debate. Some believe that this creature is left behind pet of visitors from outer space. Now that's one I don't recall ever hearing before, that it's a pet. But that it is, hence their uncanny resemblance to what we know as the Greys. They both reportedly have the large oval heads with the enormous eyes. Our typical alien mugshot. So others speculate that an alien animal hybrid crossbreed was created by scientists at NASA, suggesting that the creatures are escaped experiments gone awry. And that's a big theory for a lot of the cryptids that we know about. That will cover eventually and all. But there's also a veterinarian in South America that believes that the Chupacabra is a genetically modified vampire bat. It's a big vampire bat. But there are no reports of the Chupacabra having wings or able to take flight, except for the kangaroo-like jumping. So, but when it comes to these killings, these animals, there is never an evidence of a struggle or attack. There are simply just the 2 or sometimes 3 puncture marks, almost large enough to accommodate a human finger in the animal's neck. The discrepancy of puncture marks can be attributed to this. Some reports indicate 2 large protruding fangs on the Chupacabra, and some reports indicate that it has 3 large claws on both the hands and feet. So stories are suggesting that the Chupacabra activity can be found in newspapers dating back into the 1950s. In fact, the first reported case in North America was in Arizona, sometime around 1956. And originally, the owners of the victims thought the Chupacabra to be half human, half vampire beast. The victims, most often goats and chickens, are reportedly drained of all their blood, but are otherwise left intact. There's usually no other damage to be found on these victims. So there's your Chupacabra. Not a whole lot to say about it. It's a dog-like beast that sucks blood out of livestock, and I have never come across any stories or reports that's ever attacked people, but that kind of brings us into a merging of our next story as far as animal cryptids hurting people, and that brings us to Skinwalkers. Now, I ended up really debating whether or not I even wanted to cover this story, because it is a very taboo subject where I'm from. It's based on, or it's a story. It's not a story. It's a reality in Navajo culture, and they won't talk about it. And most natives, even if they're not Navajo, if they're from another tribe, won't talk about it. And that's why I was even debating whether I even should talk about it. Because I'm not full on Native Indigenous, like 20%. But I am a studying, near practicing shaman. In the ending slideshow, I included a couple pictures of Skinwalkers, and that are on file copies. What do they call it? File photos that you can find on the internet. But I really debated even putting up those pictures because they're scary. They're fucking terrifying, and so their heads are cropped off. I wish I can explain it in a short way what I mean by that. But moving on. So in Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. And this is where there's been related stories of people thinking the Chupacabra is a skinwalker, or the skinwalker is the Chupacabra. Vice versa. But this witch is called, now bear with me, Navajo or Dene language is very difficult to pronounce, but that's the best I could do. Which translates to, with it, he goes on all fours. It is just one of several types of Navajo witches that is considered the most volatile and dangerous. For the Navajo people, witchcraft is just another part of their spirituality and one of the ways of their lives. As such, witchcraft has long been part of their culture, history, and traditions. Witches exist alongside humans and are not supernaturals. The Navajo believe that there are places where powers of both good and evil are present, and that those powers can be harnessed for either. Medicine men utilize these powers to heal and aid members of their communities, while those who practice Navajo witchcraft seek to direct the spiritual forces to cause harm to or misfortune to others. This type of Navajo witchcraft is known as the witchery way, which uses human corpses in various ways, such as tools from the bones and concoctions that are used to curse, harm, or kill intended victims. Once they were shape-shifted, one way that others could tell that they were not a real animal is in their eyes. And they're very different than those of an animal. Instead, their eyes are very human, and when lights are shined upon them, they turn bright red. And alternately, when they're in their human form, their eyes are more like that of an animal. The evil society of these witches gather in dark caves or secluded places for several purposes. To initiate new members, to plot their activities to harm people from a distance with black magic, and perform dark ceremonial rites. These ceremonies, similar to other tribal affairs, including dancing, feasts, rituals, and sand painting, but were corrupted with dark connotations. The evildoers are also said to engage in necrophilia with female corpses and commit cannibalism, incest, and grave robberies. During these gatherings, the skinwalkers shape-shift into their animal forms or go about naked, wearing only beaded jewelry and ceremonial paint. The leader of the skinwalkers is usually an old man who is a powerful and long-lived skinwalker. Sometimes these witches evolved from living their lives as respected healers or spiritual guides who later chose to use their powers for evil. Though they could be either male or female, most are generally male. They walk freely among the tribe during the day and secretly transform under the cover of night. In order to become a skinwalker, he or she must be initiated by a secret society that requires the evilest of deeds, the killing of a close family member, usually most often a sibling. After this task has been completed, the skinwalker's individual then acquires the supernatural powers. Yeah, which gives them the ability to shapeshift into different animals. And most often they're seen more as coyotes, wolves, foxes, cougars, dogs, and bears. Similarities to the Chupacabra. But they could take the shape of any animal. They wear the skins of the animals they transform into, hence the name Skinwalker. Sometimes they also wore animal skulls or antlers atop their heads, which brought them even more power. And they chose what animal they wanted to turn into depending on the abilities needed for the particular task that they were undergoing. For different attributes that they would need would be speed, strength, endurance, stealth, claws, and teeth, etc. They may transform again if trying to escape from pursuers. And because of this, the Navajo consider it taboo for its members to wear any pelt of any predatory animal. However, sheepskin, leather, and buckskin are acceptable. So the skinwalkers have other powers too, including reading others' minds, controlling their thoughts and behavior, causing disease and illness, destroying property, and even death. So they're pretty intense. These skinwalkers, they're, like I was saying, they're pretty scary and not to be spoken about. I've had I am not Navajo Dene descendant, so I don't really have a closeness to the whole Skinwalker story as far as that goes. But I've had many Navajo friends or Dene in my life, and I would hear these stories from them, and like. Those who have talked of these encounters with these evil beings describe a number of ways to know if a skinwalker is near. They make sounds around homes, such as knocking on windows, banging on walls, scraping noises on the roof, and on some occasions they have been spied peering through windows. But more often they appear in front of vehicles in hopes of causing an accident or a wreck. And I have a story, personal story in regards to that. I wasn't there, but I was almost there. For some reason, I didn't go out with them that night. But I was in high school in the 90s, and a good friend of mine and his sister, whom are Dene, that I hung out with like on a daily basis. They're such good friends of mine. But anyway, I live right outside the Navajo reservation, and they were out driving out there because they have family, and they gave me a description of many times they're driving down the dark highway and there's a man or a wolf running alongside, just appears out of nowhere, running alongside the truck at 60 miles an hour, and it'll change into a man and go off into the distance, or possibly be a man, change into a coyote and run off into the distance. They have felt as they're going down the highway, rocking of the truck and scraping, and like something jumped on top of the roof of the truck or in the back of the bed of the truck. And so they're very scared, of course. Anybody would be. It's like a scene from a scary horror movie. So they take off, and whenever they get to a gas station with light, they get out and they see numerous claw mark like scratches along the side of the truck. Yeah, so I almost went with them. I'm glad I didn't. But that's just one of the stories I've heard from many people I know out there. It is also said that in addition to being able to shapeshift, the skinwalker is able to control the creatures of the night, such as wolves and owls, to make them do its bidding. Some are able to call up the spirits of the dead and reanimate the corpses to attack their enemies. Because of this, the natives rarely venture out alone. Of course, right? And the supernatural powers are uncanny, as they are said to run faster than a car and have the ability to jump high cliffs. They are extremely fast and agile, impossible to catch, and leave tracks that are larger than those of any animal. When they have been seen, they have been described as not quite human and not fully animal. They are usually naked, but some have been reported to be seen wearing normal clothing. So the skinwalker kills out of greed, anger, envy, spite, or revenge. Excuse me. But also robs graves for personal wealth and to collect much needed ingredients for use in black magic. So these witches, they live in the unexpired lives of their victims, and they must continually kill or perish themselves. Skinwalkers and other witches have long been blamed for all manner of unexpected struggles and tragedies throughout the years, including sickness, drought, poor crops, and sudden death. Even smaller or individual problems such as windstorms during dances, alienation of affection by mates, or the death of livestock, and reversal of fortune were often believed to be the work of a witch. Whew, man. And I've mentioned before that it's very wide open and barren and dark, no street lights, no nothing. You can come up missing out in these places, and under mysterious circumstances, even weird paranormal ones. So the dreaded skinwalkers, for whom they Navajo blamed for their years on the bleak reservation, were among them. Accusations of witchcraft and the hunting of the skinwalkers began with when someone found a collection of witch artifacts that were wrapped in a copy of the Treaty of 1868. The tribal members unleashed deadly consequences, and they called it the Navajo Witch Purge. And this occurred in 1878, in which 40 Navajo suspected witches were killed in order to restore harmony and balance to the tribe. Today, most of the tales of sightings of these witches do not include death or injury, but rather are more trickster-like. Just like the story I told you about the truck getting rocked. But, truck could have wrecked in that. You never know, but it is what it is, right? Numerous people have told stories of swift animals running alongside their vehicles, matching their speed. And after a short period, however, they run off into the wilderness, as a story I related earlier. Along the way, these animals sometimes turn into a man who sometimes bangs on the hood. Yep. Typical skinwalker story. There's another story that tells of a man who was making repairs on an old ranch home when he began to hear loud laughter coming from the nearby sheep pens. Thinking he was alone, he went to investigate and found all the sheep but one huddled in one corner of the pen. However, the lone ram, separated from the group, was standing upright and laughing in a very scary manner. like a human. And after the man locks eyes with the ram, he sees that his eyes are not that of an animal, but very like a human's. And then the animal then casually walked away on all four legs. Some say they have seen them running through the night, and sometimes turning into a fiery ball, leaving streaks of color behind them. This seems to be a common occurrence in New Mexico. Others have seen angry-looking humanoid figures looking down on them from cliffs, mountains, and mesas. Now, that's an interesting story, because there used to be a show on the Nat Geo. When we had satellite service, there was a Nat Geo channel, and they had, interesting stuff. But there was a show called Navajo Cops. Like the show we all commonly know as Cops, but this took place on the reservation. And there was an episode where they had to go out into the Bistai Wilderness, where a lot of this scary stuff happens. It's very isolated out there. And that show just never aired again. There was an episode that described exactly that. And you can hear the camera crew becoming very upset. They did not want to be there anymore. There was the howling echoing through the canyon from the cliffs. And wow. And I have a feeling that production crew was like, fuck this, we're not coming back, we're not doing this anymore, which is no surprise to me. So in the 1980s, one of the most notable events occurred when a family was driving through the Navajo reservation, as far as stories go. So as they slowed to make the sharp curve, something jumped out of a ditch, and it was described as black and hairy and wearing a shirt and pants. A few days after this event, at their home in Flagstaff, in Arizona, the family was awakened to the sounds of loud drumming and chanting. Outside their home were three dark human figures outside their fence. However, these shadowy creatures were seemingly unable to climb the fence and soon left. And that traveled all the way to Flagstaff. That, I never heard of that. These events have been occurring in the Four Corners community for centuries. This is like, you learn of this stuff at a young age. You just do. And so, witchcraft represents the antithesis of the Navajo cultural values. And so the Dene work very hard to avoid it, prevent it, and cure it in their daily behaviors. And so the laws of the Dene have always said that when a person becomes a witch, they have forfeited their humanity and their right to exist, and so therefore should be killed. That's harsh, but, well, look what's happened. For the good of the tribe, they had to do what they had to do in the past. But skinwalkers still survived anyway. But, however, skinwalkers are notoriously hard to kill, and attempts are usually unsuccessful. Trying to kill one will often result in them seeking revenge. And so a successful killing generally requires the assistance of a powerful shaman who knows spells and rituals that can turn the skinwalker's evil back around onto itself. And so another alternative is to shoot the creature with bullets that have been dipped into white ash. However, this shot must hit the witch in the neck or the head. So traditionally, the Navajo will not speak with outsiders about these creatures for fear of retribution by the skinwalkers. For that matter, it is taboo amongst the natives themselves to even speak of it. And a quote here is, "These are not things that need or should be discussed by outsiders at all. I'm sorry if that seems unfair, but that's how our cultures survive." And this was spoken by Dr. Adrienne Keene, Native American academic, writer, and activist from the Cherokee Nation, and she attended Brown, Stanford, and Harvard universities. And so it was with that quote, that last paragraph, why I even debated whether or not I should even talk about this, since it is such a sensitive subject. But it was one of the reasons why I even wanted to make this show. And the Halloween episode was pretty fitting to put it in. And like I mentioned earlier, these things are so terrifying that I just couldn't I couldn't include their faces in the image, even though it was their image I found. So, with that said, October 31st, 2022, it's Halloween night. I hope you all have fun. I hope you tune in next time for episode 4. I'm going to talk about the Dulce Wars. That's going to be primo. Pretty good stuff. I hope you have a safe night. Please be careful out there.